video, I'm going to be talking to you about the Four Noble Truths. But before I get into that, I want to go back to my previous video just for a second where I talked about attachment, suffering, and acceptance. I talked a little bit about how attachment causes the suffering in our lives, and I mentioned how you might go to work and have issues with somebody, and attachment is what's causing this. But I kind of, in the moment, forgot to really explain what kind of attachment might be doing this, because everybody knows that we can be attached to like money or food or a relationship or something like that. But another thing that we can very easily become attached to, and even more so than those other things, you see this really prevalent today in the political climate, is ideas and emotions. So if you're in conflict with somebody regularly, it's likely because you and this other person are attached to some idea or some feeling. Perhaps this person is attached to the idea that you're an idiot. Perhaps you're attached to the idea that they're an idiot. And if you're not willing to give that idea up and see that they might not be, you're always going to see them that way, and you're always going to argue with them, and inevitably the relationship will basically cause nothing but suffering. Now with that, I'll go into the Four Noble Truths, because they are actually about suffering anyway. And the Four Noble Truths are the truth that suffering exists in this world. It will always exist regardless of who you are or what you do. The second truth is that you are the cause of all of your own suffering. It's not generated from anybody else. You are not a victim. You are simply attached to things that are causing you to suffer. The third noble truth is the end of suffering, but it's not so much the end of suffering. As I said, suffering continues throughout life regardless of who you are. It's more about the cessation of the desire to suffer. And I know that sounds weird because nobody thinks that they want to suffer, but we do. We all thrive on suffering. It basically, it pushes us through life. It's our number one teacher. It's our number one motivator. When you really think about who you are and who you've been, you realize that your entire life is this long story that you told yourself about all of the events that occur around you. You tell yourself that you're the good guy. We do. Like, I don't mean you, we all do this. We tell ourselves that we're the good guy. We tell ourselves that others are bad, that they're out to get us, or that we need to overcome the odds. And that we are the hero that needs to overcome these trials and tribulations that cause us to suffer, even though that's not the case. When we realize that this is what's happening, when we're making up these stories that cause us to suffer because we want to suffer, then we can stop making up these stories. We can see life for what it is and just accept what's happening. And I don't mean accept what's happening as in like if something is terrible in your life or you perceive it as terrible, that you have to just let it go because like that's what fucking happens. You deal with life and it sucks. It's more about just accepting that it is the state of things, and to not get upset about it. It doesn't mean that you can't change things if you don't want to, but it's just about not being focused on the fact that the world isn't the way that you want it to be. I know I said that we want to suffer, but we don't think we do. But if you really think about it, in your life, in times, like we really do want to suffer. Think about a moment where you've been angry and at a person perhaps or whatever, and like you storm off and they come over to cheer you up or try to make you feel better, and you're sitting there sulking, you got this sad face and you're pouting, or you're crying or angry or whatever, and you're just like, get away from me, leave me alone, I don't want you here, I'm pissed off. That action right there, that course of action is going to take you to a place where you're going to continue suffering because you want to suffer. Because if you didn't want to suffer, you would let that person come and talk to you to try to explain themselves, or to try to tell you something that's going to get you in a better mood, or who knows what. Perhaps just being in their presence might make you feel better. But until we realize that we want to suffer, we're going to continue suffering without without being able to stop it. The fourth noble truth is the path to the end of suffering. And this is a lot more complicated than the previous three because it's actually about the Eightfold Path itself, which is going to be in the next video. The Eightfold Path itself is not like a prescription to end suffering. It's really just a set of guidelines that if you take them to heart and you try to follow them in your daily life, you will gradually begin to suffer less. To give an example of ways in which us not accepting that we are the cause of our own suffering leads to more suffering, I'm actually going to talk about car wrecks and drunk driving. So I'm sure everybody has heard a story or two about somebody drunk driving that like passed out at the wheel and maybe smashes into another car or goes off a bridge or into a ditch or something. And perhaps the other car, everybody's dead because the wreck is catastrophic. Or if you go over the bridge, the car is totaled. But this person that was drunk and passed out at the wheel ends up walking out of the wreck completely unscathed, as if it were some miracle. A lot of people get very angry at this because obviously they feel like the drunk driver should get punished, especially if having murdered a family or whatever they think. But essentially what's happening in this situation is that like the drunk driver is, or the passed out driver at this point, they're not resisting the wreck. Because they're asleep, their body is completely limp, and it's just gonna go wherever it's thrown. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but basically the truth of living life without suffering, like all of it is counterintuitive to the way we've lived our lives because we live through suffering. But anyway, when this person is limp and they're getting thrown around, their muscles aren't tense, there's nothing trying to hold anything in place, and they may get banged around a bit, get some bruises, perhaps they'll even get a broken bone or something. But people that get injured the worst in these wrecks are always the ones that are conscious and awake and they see it coming and they're bracing. So they get tight and they get rigid, and then when these objects that come crashing into them meet a force that's trying to oppose it, well, the human body's not going to do much against thousands of pounds of metal and plastic when it's trying to fight it. But if it just accepts the blow or the impact or whatever, the likelihood of incurring serious injury is going to decrease. This is don't take what I'm saying as advice on driving. I'm not saying anything about drunk driving or what you should do in wrecks. I'm just using this anecdote to kind of try to explain the idea of not resisting. And I can even use another example in my own life that's a bit different. I'll talk about the second ayahuasca trip I took back this summer. I was with some friends out on the river in Chattanooga, and it ended up being kind of a party in this area. In addition to my group of friends, there were 3 or 4 others, and there were at least 20-something people out there kind of listening to music, drinking, partying, hanging out. And I'm kind of off to the side by myself on my ayahuasca trip, and having a beautiful time, absolutely. And then all of a sudden, I just get this idea that cops are going to show up and they're going to be aggressive and mean like cops typically are, and they're going to try to ruin our fun and write us tickets or arrest us or something. And because I'm on ayahuasca and not of a standard state of mind, I'm in my head I'm thinking that they're going to see this and they're going to arrest me and I'm going to go to jail. And I start freaking out. And it's because at this point I'm trying to push myself away from these ideas because they're scary. Nobody wants to get encounter cops while they're intoxicated. Nobody wants to get into an altercation and possibly go to jail. Um, and especially in a heightened sense of awareness like you are on ayahuasca, it made this even more intense. But as I realized that all this anxiety that I was feeling that was causing me to suffer and cause my heart to rush and my blood pressure to rise, um, it was all just coming from me, coming from my fear of what would happen, and trying to push it away so that I don't feel that fear. And when I realized that, I stopped trying to push it away, and I just let myself decide that if cops were gonna show up, I was gonna remain pleasant and enjoy my trip. And if they wanted to give me a ticket or arrest me, that I was gonna let them do it, and I would enjoy my trip there. And literally, the instant that I did that, all of my anxiety melted away. And I went right back into the beauty of the trip, feeling the vibrations of the music and seeing all of the fractal patterns in the light.